Somewhere inside you is a person you have never met. That person was you, completely, for almost 3 full years. They opened their eyes for the first time. They heard a voice they would later learn to call Mother. They tasted food, felt cold air, and took their very first step. And you remember exactly none of it. Not 1 second, not one face, not one sound. Every human being who has ever lived carries the exact same blank space. Not a fuzzy memory, not a foggy one. A total, identical black hole. Most people assume the explanation is simple. The baby brain just wasn't ready yet. Too young, too undeveloped, nothing worth saving. That explanation feels obvious. It is also almost completely wrong. Your infant brain wasn't failing to record your life. It was recording everything. The memories were really there. Something else destroyed them, on purpose, as part of a process your body still runs today. In 1905, Sigmund Freud became the first person to give this blank space a name. He called it infantile amnesia. For most of the 20th century, nobody could explain what was actually happening inside it. The first real clue came from a strange, quietly brilliant experiment. In the 1980s, a psychologist tied a ribbon around a baby's ankle. The other end of the ribbon connected to a mobile hanging above the crib. The baby kicked, almost by accident, and the mobile swung. Within minutes, the baby was kicking on purpose, again and again, delighted by the motion. Days later, researchers brought the same baby back to the same crib. They didn't retie the ribbon yet. The baby started kicking anyway, immediately, as if no time had passed at all. 2-month-olds held onto that memory for a couple of days. 6-month-olds held onto it for weeks. So the science was clear on one point immediately. Infant brains can learn. They can store information. They can recall it on command. But somewhere between infancy and adulthood, every one of those memories quietly disappears. And for decades, nobody could say exactly where they went. The first piece of the answer is structural, buried deep inside your skull. There is a small curved structure in your brain called the hippocampus. Think of it as the engine room of memory formation. It takes a lived moment, a birthday, a conversation, a walk in the rain, and turns it into a story you can replay later. In an adult brain, the hippocampus works closely with the prefrontal cortex to tag and store these stories. In an infant brain, that partnership barely exists yet. The wiring between the two regions is still under construction. One key structure acts like a gateway for brand new memories. That gateway isn't fully built until somewhere between 2 and 4 years of age, so your infant brain could form short-term memories just fine. It simply had no working system to move them into permanent storage. That explanation, on its own, felt tidy for years. It also turned out to be only half the story. What comes next is stranger and far more unsettling. In 2014, 2 neuroscientists in Toronto found something that changed the entire picture. Researchers at a children's hospital lab tested an idea that sounded almost absurd. What if the very process that builds your brain is the same process that destroys your memories? Here is what they actually meant by that. In the first years of life, your hippocampus produces new brain cells at an explosive rate. Scientists call this neurogenesis, and it is essential to normal development. Those new cells are what wire up the circuits you will rely on for the rest of your life. But the researchers suspected there was a hidden cost buried inside that growth. Every new neuron that wedges itself into an existing circuit disturbs the connections already living there, the connections that were quietly holding your earliest memories in place. To test the idea, they ran a set of experiments on mice. When they artificially sped up neurogenesis in adult mice, those mice began forgetting things they had already learned. When they deliberately slowed neurogenesis in infant mice, those young mice held on to memories far longer than expected. The results were published in a major scientific journal, and they pointed to an uncomfortable conclusion. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold on to memories. It was too busy growing. The same explosion of new neurons that built your brain also overwrote what was stored inside it. Your earliest experiences weren't lost because they were never saved in the first place. They were lost because your brain kept constructing new rooms and demolishing the old walls in the process. Picture a construction site running 24 hours a day, every single day, for 3 straight years. Every wall it builds also has to come down somewhere else. That is what neurogenesis was doing inside your skull while you learned to walk and talk. But there is another layer underneath this one, and it might be the strangest part of the entire story. To form what scientists call autobiographical memory, you need something most people never think to question. Autobiographical memory means seeing yourself as the main character living through an experience. To have that kind of memory, you first need a sense of self. You need to understand that you exist as a separate person, distinct from everything around you. You need to understand that things are happening to you specifically, not just happening in general. In the late 1990s, developmental psychologists argued that this piece was missing entirely in infants. Before roughly 18 to 24 months of age, babies don't recognize themselves as distinct individuals at all. The classic test for this idea is almost embarrassingly simple. Researchers place a small dot of rouge on a baby's nose, then sit the baby in front of a mirror. Before 18 months, the baby treats the reflection like a completely different child. They reach toward the mirror, not toward their own face. After 18 months, something flips. The baby reaches straight for their own nose, for the mark that only makes sense if the reflection is them. That moment is the birth of self-recognition, and it lines up almost exactly with the earliest age autobiographical memories can begin to form. In other words, you can't remember being a baby, partly because there was no you yet. Not in the way you experience yourself right now. There was no narrator sitting inside your head, packaging experiences into a story that belonged to someone named you. And that raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with for a moment. If you had no continuous sense of self back then, and the brain holding your earliest experiences physically rewired itself beyond recognition, is the baby in your old photographs actually you? Or is it someone else entirely? Someone who lived inside the same tiny body, but whose mind was quite literally taken apart and rebuilt, neuron by neuron, into the person reading these words right now. Sit with that for just a second before moving on, because the story isn't finished yet, and the next piece changes the shape of the whole puzzle again. There's one more ingredient required to build a memory that survives into adulthood: language. A developmental psychologist spent years studying exactly how children form memories that actually last. Her conclusion was blunt. Language doesn't just describe your memories after the fact. It builds the structure they live inside. Before you could speak, your experiences existed as raw sensory static. Sounds, textures, emotions, flashes of light, with nothing holding them together. Without words to organize that static, none of it had a framework to attach to. Once children start speaking, something changes almost overnight. And once they start having conversations with adults about the past, their memory improves dramatically. A parent asking, "Remember when we went to the park?" is doing more than making small talk. They are handing their child a container to pour a memory into. Language gives memory a skeleton to hang on to. Without that skeleton, experience behaves like water poured onto sand. It exists for a moment, then it sinks away and disappears. This isn't just an abstract theory either. A researcher at Cornell found something remarkable when she compared cultures around the world. The age of a person's earliest memory actually shifts depending on where they grew up. In Western cultures, where parents constantly narrate a child's experiences out loud, asking questions, telling stories, building a personal timeline together. Earliest memories tend to begin around age 3.5. Among the Maori of New Zealand, where oral storytelling carries enormous cultural weight, memories reach back even further. Average earliest memories there stretch all the way to age 2.5. In some East Asian cultures, where early narratives focus less on the individual child specifically, first memories tend to begin closer to age 4, sometimes later. The culture that raised you is quite literally rewriting how far back your own memory can reach. Two children with identical brains, raised on opposite sides of the planet, will lose different amounts of their childhood. Not because their biology is different, because the stories told around them were different. So here, finally, is the full and complete answer to a question you have carried your entire life. Your hippocampus wasn't ready to build memories that could survive into adulthood. And even once it started catching up, a flood of new neurons tore straight through the circuits holding your earliest memories in place. You had no stable sense of self yet, nothing to anchor an experience to. You had no language yet, nothing to give those experiences a shape that could survive the years ahead. It was never one single cause. It was all of it, happening at once, inside a brain too busy becoming something to keep perfect records of what it used to be. Every human being who has ever lived went through exactly this process. Every person you have ever met carries the identical black hole where their first years should be. Your parents have it. Their parents had it. The oldest person alive today has it. It is, quite possibly, the only experience every single human on Earth shares without exception. And the answer to why isn't that your brain was too simple to keep up. It's that your brain was doing something far more important than remembering. It was becoming you, and that process required, quite literally, dismantling the person who came before. This should probably bother you a little more than it does. Think about how much of your identity rests on memory. Your sense of who you are is built almost entirely out of stories you can recall and repeat. But the very first chapters of that story were physically erased before you ever learned to read them. You didn't lose your childhood the way you might lose a set of keys. Your brain actively took it apart, piece by piece, on purpose, to make room for what came next. This is closer to an old philosophical puzzle than most people realize. Picture a wooden ship, repaired plank by plank over many years, until not one original piece of wood remains. Is it still the same ship? Now replace the wood with neurons, and the years with your first 36 months of life. The question stops being philosophical and becomes personal. Somewhere in a drawer or a phone album, there's probably a photo of you as an infant. Look at that photo again sometime, and notice what you actually feel. It probably isn't quite the same as looking at a photo of yourself from last year. There's a strange, thin distance there, even though everyone insists it's you. That distance is not sentimental, it's neurological, and now you know exactly where it comes from. This also explains something almost every parent eventually notices with quiet disappointment. You can narrate a toddler's first birthday in loving detail, year after year, and the toddler, grown into an adult, will still remember none of it firsthand. Not because you told the story wrong, because the brain that lived through it was never built to keep the original file. It only had the tools to build a replacement file, years later, out of your retelling, which means a strange truth follows close behind. Much of what feels like your earliest memory may not be a memory at all. It may simply be a photograph, or a family story, reconstructed so vividly, it feels like something you witnessed yourself. Memory researchers have a specific term for this blending. They call it a borrowed memory, built from other people's descriptions rather than your own senses. It can feel exactly as real and vivid as something you actually lived through. There is often no internal signal telling you the difference. This is part of why courts treat very early childhood memories with real caution. Not because young children lie, because the machinery required to store a reliable memory simply wasn't finished being built yet. None of this means your childhood didn't matter. It shaped the wiring of the brain you use every single day, whether you can recall the events or not. A toddler who was spoken to constantly built stronger language circuits than one who wasn't, regardless of what either one remembers today. A child raised in a chaotic, frightening environment can carry that imprint into adulthood as anxiety, even with zero conscious memory of the cause. The experiences are gone as stories, but never gone as architecture. You are, quite literally, built out of years you cannot consciously access. That is either deeply unsettling or strangely comforting, depending on how you choose to look at it. Unsettling, because it means a version of you existed and vanished without leaving a single memory behind. Comforting, because it means you are already the product of experiences you don't have to carry consciously to be shaped by them. Some researchers now believe understanding this gap could change how we treat early childhood trauma entirely. If a child can be shaped by an experience they will never consciously remember, then healing may not always require remembering the event itself. It may require repairing the architecture that experience built, brick by brick, without ever reopening the file. This idea is still being tested in clinics and universities around the world, but it already points toward something the Rouge and Mirror experiment first hinted at decades ago. Identity was never really about perfect memory storage to begin with. It was always about the structure memory gets poured into, one story at a time. So the next time someone shows you a baby photo and says, "Look how cute you were," you might notice a strange, honest impulse to correct them. That baby learned to crawl inside a brain that has since been rebuilt beyond recognition. That baby met people you will never remember meeting. That baby felt fear, joy, and comfort that shaped you completely and left behind no footage at all. In every meaningful sense, that baby is gone. Not forgotten in the ordinary way. You forget where you left your keys. Gone the way a demolished building is gone, even while a new one stands on exactly the same foundation. And yet somehow, impossibly, you are still standing there. Same foundation, same name, same face slowly aging in the same family photographs. Just built from an almost entirely different set of materials than the ones you started with. Every human alive is walking around on top of a foundation like this. A person they will never remember, who quietly built the very mind now reading this sentence. Freud gave that blank space a name in 1905 and called it infantile amnesia. But naming a black hole was never the same as understanding it. It took nearly a century of ribbon-tied mobiles, mirror tests, and mice in laboratory cages to get this close to an answer. And even now, the full picture is still being filled in, one careful experiment at a time. What we do know is this: you are not missing a memory. You are missing a person, one who no longer exists in any retrievable form. That person built you, plank by plank, neuron by neuron, out of everything they lived through and could never keep. So the question isn't really why you can't remember being a baby. The question is what you're quietly building right now, in this exact moment, that some future version of you will never remember either. Somewhere down the line, someone wearing your face is going to forget this very sentence too.